the last episode we released tonight. The book is for Dublin. Are you drinking
Aghainiushla agus a cháde. Tá an áilte ar fad roid ag an ócáid nef contíanta chamerá and seo tróna. You're very, very welcome to this. This is one of a series of events, of book events that we'll be doing over the winter, and each and every one of them are different. And to say that this is different is to put it very mildly. This is a book by Rory Hearne, who is a professor and lecturer in Maynooth University. I'm going to read out some of the things he writes or researches, just because I don't want to leave them out. He works in the Department of Applied Social Sciences in Maynooth University. He has an awful lot of research published and research done as well on the housing, on social housing, on spatial disadvantage. I never heard that expression until today. On housing rights, economics, inequality, neoliberalism and the welfare state, social justice. Now all of this sounds very academic, but the gift that this man has is to put all of that into very plain and simple language. And he has done this, he has proven it many times with his writings, with his broadcasts, with his television appearances, and with his books. And this is the latest book, Gaffs. I was asking earlier, what does gaff mean to you? A kind of a place where you just throw your head down on the floor. Yeah. It also, of course, means mistakes. If you make a gaff, I mean, isn't it some kind of a boo-boo that you've made? So maybe he's going to tell us about the mistakes that people have done in the book. Now, I want to say this is a free lecture, and we're very, very privileged to have Karen from the Simon Community here, because who else better to represent the homeless people than the Simon Community? They're doing superbly as it is. So it is a free lecture, and there's absolutely no pressure. We have a bucket on the desk outside, so if anybody wants to volunteer anything, please feel free. The book is on sale outside, and Rory will be signing them later on. So if you want your book signed, tonight is the night. So would you please give a warm welcome to Karen and to Rory.
It may not look like it. I'm a little bit intimidated by microphones and technology and stuff. So firstly, I suppose as Tom has explained, I work with Galway Simon, and I was kind of very interested, and I'm delighted to have this conversation this evening, because I think in reading the book, it's like it's drawing together and putting shape on what has been the experience of those of us who work in frontline homeless services over the last 10 years. And it was almost kind of a music or a staccato rhythm when you kind of go through the different years and you're thinking about these kind of different situations we've kind of had to face. Something like an organisation like Galway Simon, which has been around for 40 years, was kind of set up with a very particular set of people who were deeply excluded for complex reasons, and we were in the business of providing support, sheltered housing, eventually hoping people to move on. But it was a very defined kind of set of the Galway population. In what has happened and the way the homeless crisis has escalated, we get referrals and we work with people now where there can be 2 incomes in a household and they cannot find somewhere to live. So, but this book, I think, helps us to understand how this has come about. I think what's also really important in it is talking about the importance of home, because there is so much talk and figures about what this means at an emotional and a psychological level. I think the book gives a lot of time and sets out. So I want to say thanks for writing this, and maybe to even kind of to start just your own kind of how that becomes your starting point.
Yeah, thanks a million. And it's great to see so many here tonight. I'm absolutely delighted. And delighted to be, talking with Simon Community, Karen from Simon. The work is so important that's been done, and to Kennys as well for the great support as well. I do feel very nervous because I have to, my mother-in-law is in the audience. So I am feeling, my wife is from Galway, so there's a strong Galway connection. But yes, she's here, so I'm very conscious of what I say, but no, it's in terms of the book, I suppose what I was trying to do in it, and was to try and write about what's going on for people in a way that anybody could pick it up and read it, and that, because I feel that so much of the discussion about the housing crisis and homelessness kind of happens around statistics and numbers and policy, and talking to a lot of people who are affected, or they feel alienated from it. They feel kind of that they're not in it. So really, when I was writing it, I wanted to, I suppose, put the humanity back in the discussion around housing, and put the home back into housing as well. And it is about home, and I do spend quite a bit of time in the book writing about the psychology of home, like what home means to us and the importance of it, because I think what happened really during the Celtic Tiger was particularly this whole idea of property as investment and people becoming multiple property owners really it distorted our understanding and kind of what actually home means and what value it has. And as I write in the book, we've forgotten what the true value of home is. It's not its price, or what it's actually its role, as I talk about, in providing somewhere that's from the minute we're born as children, a secure home that you can be in, and from a psychological perspective, for children, having somewhere, a place that they can be, that they can grow, like they need that. They need space, they need security, they need to be able to feel safe. And that enables us, as human beings, we need that to actually grow and develop. And this is so fundamental to us. And I was really, when I was reading, researching for it, I was really struck by that, and thinking about not just those who are, because there are over 3,000 children with their families in emergency accommodation in the country. Thinking also about, the figures I was looking at them, 1 in 4 children in Ireland are now growing up in the private rental sector, which is a place that people aren't secure, that they can be, evicted by the landlord, or, if they're selling up, and that's no place for a child to be growing up in the sense of having that security. So putting home back into housing was what I was trying to do.
Yes, and I think that's the, just echoing that, I think that is when there is such a bombardment of numbers, but what that actually breaks down to, like to any of you in this room, if we were to say, think about maybe your first day at school, or think about your 4th birthday, what was the colour of your front door? It will start off a whole load of memories of places and belongings. We're in a choir and we sing, a million, like there's a million memories with that, but this becomes the architecture often, like of who we are, the security, and it's the numbers who are not getting that experience because of the housing crisis, because of living in hotels, direct provision, family hubs. And the numbers right now it's 3,000, but if you add up what that has been over the last 5, 8, 10 years, it's building into such another crisis for the future, and it really is quite worrying.
Yeah, no, it is, and I suppose what in terms of the book, that what I was trying to go deep into was that idea of home, and I came across this guy called Gaston Bachelard was his name, and he was a French philosopher. I don't know if anybody has come across him, and he wrote this book called The Poetics of Space, and it's not outer space, it's the spatial bit, the space, which of course is our physical surroundings. And he wrote it in the 1960s, and it was all about how the home, the physical building of the home, is, as you talked about memories, becomes imbued with memories. And he even talked about this touch memory idea that, if people, you walk back to a childhood home, and if you put your hand on a door handle, a certain door handle, memories come back to you. And so it was this idea that these physical buildings, he talked about them, the need to, this is the 1960s he was writing, as a philosopher thinking about home and what it meant. He described it as the shelter of the mind, that this is what a home is. It's the place where we dream, and again, you think about, if you're, even like people coming home, the idea of coming home is a feeling in and of itself. And it was, I was struck by, there was one story I write about a young guy who was in his early 30s from Kilkenny, the poor fella. But as we all, I'm from Waterford originally, and of course as Galway Waterford people, we don't have a lot of sympathy for Kilkenny people, but I had sympathy for this guy, and he was just talking about, he's living at home with his parents, and he said, I come home and he works, he has his job, he's working, and he goes, I can't just throw my bag down and put my feet up on the couch because my mum will say, come on, it's not your house. And this is his home as someone in his early 30s. And I was really struck by that over the last kind of year and a half, listening to people in their 20s, 30s, even 40s. And the numbers are phenomenal, they're really phenomenal. 1 in 10 of people living in this country are adults living at home with their parents. And, there's obviously great benefits, and I love our parents, but the reality is the surveys show that they don't want to be living there. They want their own independent home. But again, that thing of, what is it to have your own home, and what does that mean? And the importance of it psychologically for us to have our own space. And this is where I challenge this idea that policy, which has been driven for the last decade, this idea that everybody will be happy being renters in the private rental sector, that this is, but that doesn't actually fulfill Maslow's hierarchy of human need, of having a place where you can belong, having a place where you can feel safe and secure, having a place where you can have your own independence, and of course that we don't provide housing for those people who are stuck at home. But
I think even about kind of the renters or single people, again in a conversation this week we were talking about our youth service, and when that was being dreamt up in 2012, 2013, there was kind of concern of particularly maybe more vulnerable young people, and there'd be times they'd end up getting stuck in tourist hostels, and it was kind of trying to come up with kind of a solution that was a bit more complex than that. But in the conversation, I was going, well, the chance of getting a bed in a tourist hostel midweek in Galway is impossible, because it is full of the student experience now is you are living 16 to a room in dorms Monday to Friday, and you're gone, and the tourists are in for the weekend. That's not to and as having had a college experience go, Mayo people are by and large commuting to college. There's just so many knock-ons at so many levels, at so many stages of people's development.
There are, and we are seeing this with students. The students had a great walkout yesterday. I think they were out in Galway as well, as far as I know. And as I said, the students in my classes, were talking, I was asking them in terms of their situation, and one of them said, I pulled into the car park in Maynooth and there was a student asleep in the car with her duvet, and I was like, had she just taken a rest? She's like, no, clearly she's sleeping in her car. And there was others saying they're commuting from places as far away as Sligo, to Maynooth, in terms of a drive, 4 to 6 hours, and that's not it's not an education experience when you're exhausted. And we even see it in terms of students coming to lectures, and that is important that students have that experience and that time, to be that. But there are so many, and that of course goes back to the private rental sector again, that issue around that, students used to get accommodation in the private rental sector, but now because people can't buy a home, they're stuck longer in the rental sector, so there's no, basically that kind of accommodation that was there for students isn't there. And the other big thing, the big criticism I have of Gaffs, of policy, and at some level, if only they were mistakes, they were actual policy design, was the whole issue of not building social housing, public housing, that now over the last 10 years it's been pushed in the private rental sector, the HAP, payment which is an utter disaster.
And I think that is the bit, like, we know that health is important, we have a less than perfect health system, we know that education is important, we have a less than perfect education system, but we expect the state to be involved. And I think, I think this book helps us to understand, but do we fully appreciate the fundamental mistake that was made by the state, withdrawing so much to such an extent from providing homes?
Yeah, no, I don't think that, I don't think we fully do understand what we've, people living it are feeling it and realising it, but I think the wider population, that's what I really hope from the book, the public actually take the time to read it, because I think we really need to fully understand what has happened. And in terms of that fundamental failure of seeing housing as home, the need for housing, as you say, and as I write it, is as fundamental as health, and as education. And nobody says that we should leave our primary schools or secondary schools up to their provision, up to whether a private provider wants to provide them or not. Similar with our accident and emergency services and our health system, bad and all as it is there. And if people need healthcare at some level, they might have delays, but they'll get it, because we understand that if you left education and health just to private providers, there'd be massive inequalities. There would be huge. It would be back to, the time when people didn't have access to healthcare or education, and huge inequalities. But that is the situation in housing. We completely handed it to essentially the private market in lots of different forms, be they, property purchasers, investor funds increasingly, and banks to provide mortgages. The state, Irish state, the incredible thing is that we used to provide housing in this country. Councils built housing in Galway. Every small town in this country has housing built by councils. People from all backgrounds lived in them. And then in the 1980s, we just took on the Thatcher idea that the market will do it, everybody will become this homeowner. And they stopped building council housing and social housing, and really just continued on from there in terms of left us now where we're at.
And I think that bit in the book is kind of important as well. It's about but the residualization, because now the idea of, is still not being let go of, that concentrations of social housing are a bad idea. Nobody wants them near them. Is there too many on my side of the town? Or the debates that happen kind of at local level. But that kind of problem that nobody, it is the obvious solution, but it's a solution there is such resistance to. How do we make that kind of, clearer that it is, and is that we need to be talking about public housing more so than social housing? Because everybody, we all have people belonging to us that came through social housing, public housing as it was. Yeah, it is, the stigmatization of public housing is something that I write about. Where did that come from? And part of it was this idea that, again, back to Thatcher and Margaret Thatcher, and we took on those ideas that social housing and council housing created these lazy people and created this dependency, and that it was about, this idea that there was a deserving poor and an undeserving poor, and that if you worked hard you would get, what you deserve, and obviously if you didn't, then you aren't deserving. And it really meant that, part of it, there was this whole, these narratives of, ghettos and, sink estates and people who came from them, and it really has become stigmatized. And of course, you're right to say that, so many people, and there's so many strong communities in social housing. So I think there is a need to sort of understand what role social housing plays, but also, as I talk about in the book, the kind of hopeful side I try to get to is that we can recreate public housing in a new way. And I think that's the point, that it doesn't have to be like this. That if you look at like Austria, in Vienna, they have public housing where half the population live in it.
architects and planners and doctors live alongside people who are cleaners or people who are unemployed, and it works because it's really good quality, it's well designed, it's mixed income, and there's no reason why we can't do that here. There's absolutely no reason why we can't provide what you call that public housing. And I do make the case in the book, I think it needs to be a mix of, housing that people can buy, that is owned, but I think it should be then, in order to avoid it just going out into the market, it should be permanently affordable housing that people can buy, sell back to a cooperative running it, that it should be a mix of affordable rental that's available to people on any incomes, affordable purchase that people can buy, and then your traditional social housing in communities. And we have massive land banks. Galway is a great example of that. The land that is around and within the city that could be developed with these new, what I call public housing affordable communities that will be sustainably developed as well. There's real opportunities and there's real possibilities, but it does require us, rethinking how we do things, and I think that's something hopefully will come out of it.
The extent to which we missed an opportunity after the housing crash after 2008 with the establishment of NAMA, like the scale of that is a bit mind-boggling.
It is all right.
Good job I gave up smoking.
I get quite angry in the book at NAMA at that point. Yes, I get very, very angry because I remember, as many others did at the time, raising the point that when NAMA was set up, the amount of land around Dublin, around Kildare, Wicklow, and parts of Galway as well, buildings. At one point, NAMA I think owned 10,000 apartments, and I argued at the time that this was, now we could actually use this state body to permanently provide affordable housing in the country. But no, they wanted to, they decided to sell them off to the vulture funds, essentially, which was a criminal act. We could call it whatever we want, but I feel it was utterly it was so wrong what they did in terms of making that decision and, bringing in, and it's changed the course of now. It's predominantly in Dublin, that problem with investor funds that are now there, that are essentially locking people out of Dublin from being able to buy a home. And we've land sitting here, like I was looking at it, I don't know if you're familiar with the Land Development Agency has land, and I think this is actually a site, possibly that they own, or up the road is a site, and there's another site, I think Dyke Road, and I was looking to see where what was the update. They were saying they were going to provide 1,200 homes, and the last time I could come across something was 2020, so 2 years ago. What has happened? We don't, and you're going like, do they know there's a housing emergency at all? You just go, I don't know, I wonder.
And I think there's something of, and I think that piece about things have become so, that again the local authorities too just kind of, that institutional knowledge and know-how, being lost. That almost came in, to build, to have planners to actually do to do any of this. So we are in a kind of a cycle that's very developer. And I hope we are turning the corner to a certain extent on that, in that local authorities are starting to get back building. Like I was looking at Galway, I think there was 200 social homes built here last year in between housing associations and local authorities. I looked back for 2016, it was zero. There was nothing built for a number of years. And of course this is the problem, that over those years from 2011 to 2016, 17, there was nothing built, no social housing at all. And that really is kind of at the heart of why we're in the crisis now. But local authorities are starting again. They're still, they are buying from the market as well, which is an issue. But you're absolutely right, that whole thing of, we spent 20 years basically telling local authorities to stop building, and now we're saying, the government is saying, oh, you need to build, come on, we're throwing all this money at you, why aren't you building? And they're like, is there anybody here? Literally looking around, where's the architect, where's the planner, where's the engineer? That's what we need to build, and I think that's part of it. We have to realise that we do have to build back up the capacity. But I wonder, and I make the suggestion, we actually need, I think, a state construction company.
I think we need a state development company like the ESB rolled out electricity, because the local authorities, if we leave it up to just each individual one, it's kind of hit and miss, and they will do it at different levels, where I think we need to really ramp up very quickly our capacity to build. And we know now that private developers are saying next year they might stop building. They are going to stop building at a certain level because interest rates are rising, cost of materials are rising, and you're going, so we need to do something pretty big, pretty quickly.
We certainly do, and it's like, and I know that there is a lot of constructive suggestions in the book, and I'd like to come to that in a minute. And I'm hoping I haven't, the time hasn't kind of run away, and I'm sure other people would like to ask questions as well. But I think that there is a bit of a, I think in frontline services, I don't think I'm being too strong in saying, like, it is really getting concerning. What is it? It looks like you're looking over a precipice. Like, every year and for the last 10 years, it's kind of, that our numbers, our own statistics, the numbers that are needing help, that we're helping, they have kept, that graph has kept going in a particular way. The profile has changed, and the base layer kind of is widening, but finding solutions for people. Again, things like, there was a conversation during the week where we very happily been involved in a situation where a very young woman who was pregnant, was provided with kind of secure housing, and then reflecting on the moment, and it was just kind of like, but that used to be normal. Like, this is, like, it was like we'd won the lotto, like we'd invented the wheel. And that bit is kind of, it's kind of quite worrying, because there's so little room left to manoeuvre. There are no because again, a huge amount of investment has gone into dealing with this crisis, all been about emergency. And when you look at what's spent on homelessness, there is, the percentage, that graph is very askew. But there are no beds now to be found. Like, there are no beds in hotels, there are no beds in hostels. There, so the numbers being forced into more and more precarious situations is quite. It is quite worrying. There are really good things happening, like housing first, but again, we can't find the right property. So it's that taking. I think this book is a chance for. There really has to be a public push, similar, I suppose, to what happened in Maynooth that time. When wasn't it Maynooth when that
the investor fund bought the
whole estate?
Yeah. No, I'm very worried about homelessness in terms of where it's going. Very, very concerned. From what services like yourselves and Focus Ireland are saying, that they're seeing people who are becoming homeless, as you said, who they've never seen before. And I'm contacted regularly because on my social media I share people's stories anonymously to try and give them a voice and put pressure, and so more people are sending me saying, I want you to tell my story. And like, I'm getting contacted by people in their early 40s who are working as a barber, and maybe as a go back to study, who are renting, and then the landlord is selling up and they just can't find anywhere. And they're literally, there's one married couple who contacted me and said, we're now living separately in family houses. This situation of what's called hidden homelessness. And in terms of homelessness, it really is, it is very, very worrying where it's going. And so that's why we need, I think, the likes of the eviction ban in place for quite a while, not just 6 months. And there needs to be emergency measures. Like, they could be building modular homes at a much greater scale. They could be done quite rapidly. They're good quality homes. There are things they could be doing. I think that, we look at vacancy, dereliction. I was looking at the significant amount of vacant and derelict properties in Galway. There's
a lot of people making a lot of money out of it.
There is, well, I would say there's a small amount of people making a lot of money out of it, and they are making very big money. I was looking at the profits for IRES REIT, which is now our biggest private landlord. It's Irish Residential Real Estate Trust. 44 million in net profit they made last year from 4,000 tenants, a 50% return on profit. Like it's just, this is it's wrong what's happening, and I think that the right to housing is absolutely fundamental, and it's really important that, when I talk about this in the book, that there's kind of this false straw man argument or whatever idea been put up that if we put a right to housing in our constitution, it would mean that everybody, as they say, as Carl Dieter was saying last night, you'd have a 21-year-old rocking up and saying, I'm out of here, I want to go get my house from the right to housing in the constitution. And it's just like, it's utter nonsense. That's not what a right to housing means. What a right to housing means is set out very clearly by the United Nations. It means that governments and countries ensure that they have a housing system that is where people can access affordable housing, secure housing that's of decent standard. And that can be done through lots of different ways. And it would really require, I think, governments and local authorities and states and not-for-profit organisations really stepping up in terms of their housing delivery. But it wouldn't mean anybody, once you turn 18, you go, where's the key in my house? Like, it's just utter nonsense. But it would, I think, be a really important, having that referendum, I think, would be a really important opportunity for us as a country to have the discussion about housing and see that, like, is it right that some people have multiple properties and others have none? And we have a generation who literally, are facing, the majority of them are facing the prospect of never owning their own home. And the kids coming up behind them, where are they going to be able to get the homes to buy? And I think it is important that people have the ability to buy an affordable home, or to rent one, or to have access to public housing as a fundamental need. And so I think that right to housing referendum is really important. I hope it happens, but it will be a hard battle.
I think if there is, and I can't help but kind of think that this is one of the really critical areas that, and again, I think there's a real chance to, I think, really get the picture very clear kind of in this book, and hopefully the motivation to say we actually have to look for this. There's a kind of a, this is the biggest way I think we can kind of change the dynamic, change the trajectory, because and we won't, the length, the institutional investors have been such a game changer, but the scale and the rate, the kind of the velocity, the acceleration of that change to the dynamic. I was on the train coming down from Dublin, was it on Tuesday, and when you there's all these cranes and all these apartments you see being built, I said, something's happening. No, it isn't. No. Shoeboxes are being built for people to rent.
And no one can buy any of them.
Nobody can buy any of them.
No. People are getting locked out. But I do think, and I point in the book that I think that there's a value shift happening, that particularly amongst people who are locked out, the locked out generation, millennials, they don't see housing as property or investment. They just I just want a bloody home, it's just as straightforward as that. And I do think that it is, in a way, I talk about it like repeal and in marriage equality, those kind of cross-generational conversations and cross-society conversations, that we need to have those and go, look, the way it's not working for that generation. It absolutely isn't, and it needs to change. And we need to see housing as a human right, and that the state has to step up a lot more. And that will require pressure and us engaging in protest and engaging in, lots of different ways we can do things. And I give lots of different examples, signing petitions, all sorts of things. And also hopefully young people being involved and empowered. I just go, you look at this land here and you go, why not offer young people of Galway, the opportunity to be involved in, designing and self-building their own homes and supporting them with, you can't expect people to build, but there's people who want to do things, and the state could do that. It could set up a cooperative that people, like they did in the 70s, people built their own homes and designed them, or they, would contract a builder to be involved. And I just think there's so much more that could be done in that way, and in not just kind of seeing us as, we have to wait for the investor funds, we have to wait for the developer, we have to wait. Why? We could be doing this.
And I suppose that's, and I think in our in our history, you've had people like, you know, Noel Brown, Donna O'Malley, you know, that there were, you know, more, I suppose kind of single figures, you know, the British experience being Nye Bevan, like, who absolutely had a vision, and and I suppose we're happy to take on the systems, because I think that's the other bit that's a little bit worrying, is like the extent to which our housing department has been in thrall to the REITs.
Yeah, they have. Right, but yeah, I think the Department of Housing is been, and policymakers, unfortunately, the state have been utterly just, you know, they spent, I was so frustrated, they spent from like 2011 onwards, you know, trying to think how could they get the developers back again. That was all policy was about. And I remember, like, you know, listening to the Department of Housing presentations in 2014, 2015, 2016 about, you know, it's not viable for builders to build now. What can we do? And like, build frickin' homes yourselves. Like, that's what we do, you know? It's just, they're just so tunnel visioned, and then of course the investor funds came in and they met them. You know, they sat down with there was someone put a freedom of information request in about Michael Noonan, former Minister for Finance, about who he was meeting. And I think he'd met like investor funds 200 times, and he met people advocating around housing, you know, tenants and homeowners like 5 times.
He thought vultures were great.
Yeah, he said, I quote in the book, he had a great quote, I don't know if people know, heard it, where he said that vultures play a really, he was saying vulture funds are great, and they play a really important role in the ecology because they pick the carcass and they clean up, you know, and that's, this was his viewpoint, and it was like going, you know, I think they're so divorced from reality, I actually do, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, but as I said, I think we're definitely
The time.
We're kind of watching the time. Are there? Would you be happy to take a few
Yes,
questions?
absolutely. Yeah.
Is there
What's still not
anything-
hard or
There's a few. Yeah.
Thanks Mark Lowen from Sinn Féin, and thanks Rory it's very informative, and thanks to both of you for bringing up the concept of housing and your opening comments, and especially about children, because that's very profound and it brings home the reality of what's going on. But I had a question about your state construction company concept, because you're saying that the local authorities, it can be difficult to get something built. There's lots of land banks around, but it's not zoned for housing. So would you see the state construction company an extension of some national planning body or housing body, as opposed to taking it away from the local authorities and having a 26 county wide planning body that zones and plans?
That's a hard question. I put that in the hard category. I think for me the starting point is that there is issues around zoning. I would think that for me the construction company, the state development agency, that I think we need at a starting point is actually building the actual construction, design, development capacity. Local authorities have land that is zoned. I know there's not enough of it, but that should be done more of. We do have the Land Development Agency. It has land, it's saying it's trying to develop, but it has no development capacity. If we think of the architects, the engineers, the QSs, the actual people who build the home, that's what I think we need, that you would, because we have the land. So that would be kind of my vision of it. It'd be like ESB delivery that local authorities would contract in to develop and build. So the local authorities wouldn't necessarily hand them over the land, if that makes sense.
There's a few. I'll take this one. I'll take you in a second. Yeah. You put your hand up.
Hi. Just I suppose one of the things with housing is particularly with owner occupiers, it's a very insider outsider. So if you're an insider, you're in, and if you're an outsider, obviously there's a huge barrier to entry, as you talk about the people who can't buy. And there was a Waterford Whispers article, I think early last year, where they were saying that I'm all supportive of affordable housing, but if it knocks 1 penny off the value of my house, I'm going to riot. Do you think that's kind of starting to change? I suppose as people who are homeowners are seeing their own children, do you think that's something that might start to maybe ease a little bit?
Yeah, I was really hopeful that would ease, and because when I was writing the book, I was talking about this, that I was appealing directly to older homeowners and saying, look, what is the point in you being so excited about the 10% rise in your property value if you know those kids knocking around that you want out of your house, they can't get out because your property price is rising so much. And then I was really pleased to see there was 2 opinion polls done in the last year, which showed that it was like 75% of people wanted house prices to fall. Like, that was unheard of. So I do think that shift in thinking has happened amongst the majority of people. I also think that's one of the reasons, and I write about this, why the government was so reluctant to intervene and do anything that might interfere with the rising property prices, because they thought that all their voters, wanted rising house prices. And so, I think they're still stuck thinking our voters want rising house prices when they're actually going, no, we don't. I think that's part of why they're losing massive support at the moment. But I think that is a place of hope that I see, that sort of change. People are realising, do you know what? Constantly rising property is worthless to anybody, really, because even if you're selling your home, you're still buying in the market, and so it doesn't. The only people benefit from that are people flipping properties and things like that. So.
Okay.
Once it's not the mother-in-law, that's all right.
This is probably kind of a selfish question, but how, would you have any advice for combating the feeling of absolute hopelessness in owning a home for young people? Because seeing the government spending 3 million on new Garda uniforms and not putting barely any money into housing, it makes me so angry, and I feel like I'll never be able to afford a home in Ireland, which breaks my heart. Would you have any advice for, other than rioting?
Good start.
No, I don't advocate rioting. My days of rioting are over. I think that it's a really, I really feel for you, and part of why I wrote the book was my heart is breaking, and I do feel from my own kids as well growing up, and what future is ahead of them. And I suppose that what I write in the book, I say, is that I appeal to you, first of all, not to emigrate, because I know there's a lot of young people now just emigrating, going, why the hell would we stay here? I think that, and I make the point in the book as well, is that, and it was actually Fintan O'Toole really pointed it out, but kind of thinking about it in his review, he said, the point that I make in the book is bad policy got us here, which means that it's not something that can't be changed. So good policy could get us out of here. And so I think that there is real possibilities within a relatively short space of time, that if we get the policies changed, that you would have the opportunity to be able to buy and get a home in this country. I think that actually, hopefully this book is part of it, but I do feel that the attitudes amongst people, that the demand for change is going to become so big, the government is going to have to do things that it wouldn't have ordinarily done. And I feel that there's hope there in that. And I hope you get involved in pressuring in lots of ways that you can, and pressure for that land to be handed over to young people and build their homes and have this future in this country. You are our future, so that's what I would try and give hope. That would give some hope.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a lady there with glasses. She's had her hand up a long time. Yeah.
My name is Maura Daly. How do you do, Rory? Thanks for the note on Twitter. I work in the arts. I work with young people a lot. This concerns me because, interestingly, I'm also a landlord, and I can't house everybody. I have a son who can barely afford his housing and has had to drop out of college. We're doing up the one building we have. We have a friend who's homeless staying there, and we have a friend on our sofa tonight who's in her 60s and a barrister. So I do feel our politicians have a lack of vision and certainly a bankruptcy of imagination. And my experience, because I work in a bit of advocacy, just community stuff, just in my parish, anytime I have a solution or I try and make it scalable, I don't know if this is helpful to anyone, I all of a sudden find that a lot of politicians and civil servants are very interesting to talk to me if I've got a little micro version of a solution. So I just would like to add the issue of squatting. What do you think of the issue of squatting? Yeah.
It's an interesting one. It's currently illegal, I think.
Well, now.
That's a question.
A lot of people, especially if they're property owners like me, bristle at it. But the idea behind squatting, and there was a lot of it done, I don't know if folk remember in Galway, at the beginning of independence. And the reason behind that is when properties are abandoned, they don't belong to anybody. So you have to have access to it without asking permission. And I think the period of time is 12 years. And I know, because my grandfather was an engineer in Galway, has some history on this, that where the Bailey stands right now was a piece of squatted land from the 1960s. Somebody squatted it, it was just a field, it was genuinely abandoned, I believe before World War II, by someone. They did the whole history on this, and eventually the family just started putting potatoes on it in the 60s when they built new estates in Salt Hill. And sure, they couldn't find the owner, and they did a little bit of due diligence because the heritage had gone to Australia, couldn't find their relatives, and then went for, what is it legally, adverse possession. They got adverse possession and they sold it, and the Bailey, which is the epitome of selling and reselling the same flats and giving back the money, was built on that. So there is a legal area for squatting there, and there are areas where it is illegal. You can't just jump into your neighbour's property, but one answer could be genuinely looking at some buildings get lost in the ether.
Oh, absolutely.
Their ownership through death, relatives gone abroad, etc.
I think the issue of derelict properties is massive. Like, you just look at the scale of dereliction, and we saw the census came out there and showed again 166,000 vacant homes. And the point of those, they're vacant homes that are livable in. They're not the derelict ones. They don't count. We actually don't count the amount of derelict buildings there are. Geodirectory provides a bit of a count, but it's not significant. And you can see them everywhere. They're everywhere. And so I think that we have to look at ways that we can take that property. I think the state should be compulsory purchasing them, or compulsory sales, that they're brought into that collective ownership. And there is people, I think, squatting in Dublin at the moment, taking over certain buildings. People who are frustrated are going to do that.
It's a young person's game.
It is a young person's game, absolutely. It's hard to get back and collect the kids when you're squatting the building. But, but there is, I think I would absolutely understand why people would do it, and there probably is a need to show the level of dereliction and vacancy. And we know Apollo House was very successful in highlighting that back in 2016, and other ones in 2020. I think we're likely to see more of it.
Okay,
Yeah, thanks.
There's now a lot. Maureen has had her hand up. You've had your hand 2, 3, Catherine 4, 5. So what do you think? 5 questions?
Go ahead, why not?
I think Maureen, use yours up first. Okay.
Thanks for that. And I think I find anyway in the last maybe even year, I feel like it's actually gotten a lot worse. There was like a little bit period of time where houses were coming on stream and there was emergency accommodation. I feel there's no emergency accommodation at the moment. I find it's coming up a lot, and the second thing is I don't see anything really coming on stream. But my query is in relation to modern methods of construction and your view on that in terms of actually the fast delivery of housing, and also in terms of combating climate change as well.
Yeah, and I write actually quite a bit about climate change in the book as well.
I only bought it, so I haven't bought it.
No, I make the point because within the housing crisis, it's often hard to start talking about the climate crisis as well, because it's bad enough the housing one, and then we get more despairing about climate. But I actually to write in the book that we can address both of them, like really, and we need to. And the Green Building Council just came out yesterday saying that about can we build all these homes while also meeting our climate targets. And you're absolutely right. The off-site construction methods in factories is a real way to reduce essentially the carbon that's produced from building. Very significant. It can be significantly reduced. And we know there's a factory in Carlow. I think there's a factory in Monaghan. There's a number of factories that have been looking for funding to expand. So again, that's an area where I think we should be. Again, should the state be setting up modular factories? I don't see why it shouldn't, and funding this if the private sector isn't able to or willing to do it, that could build homes they can build them within 2-3 weeks, and they can have them erected on the site within 3 or 4 days. So it seems to me again, that's a no-brainer, and you're absolutely right climate-wise. And climate-wise as well, for the vacancy and dereliction, you know, infrastructure is a big thing with housing as well, that if you don't have access to water, you know, sewage, those systems, you know, you can't just build housing. And that is an issue with delays as well. We don't have infrastructure like water and transport, but within our towns and cities, that all is there. And so to me, it's like environmentally, it is criminal to be allowing buildings sitting there on top of sewage systems and water systems that could be connected with. So I think climate-wise, there is a lot that could be done in terms of that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, just on the topic of squatting, usually we're actually social science students, and we went to Barcelona on a field trip in April, and like one of the things we discussed was the issue of squatting and how it's interesting how like the government in Spain and in Barcelona is dealing with that they're sort of like, if the landlord doesn't have a plan for the building, then they legally cannot kick the squatters out. But I think we were also discussing how in Ireland, like, we don't really have like an anarchist mindset. Like, it's sort of hard. Like, we're very just like, sure, it's grand, we'll just deal with it. But like in Spain, like, they really have like an anarchist mindset, and like they're really into protests and really into squatting, and it's just like, how do you think that would work in Ireland? I also have another question, sorry.
Just in terms of the Barcelona is very interesting, because they did introduce that. Wasn't aware of that one, but they also introduced essentially use it or lose it. That if owner of a property isn't using their property, the state will essentially take it over and start using it and not buy it, but just literally take it over, refurbish, and say we're putting someone in here. So I think there is a lot of stuff there in terms of the anarchism, you know, and activism. It's all needed, you know, in terms of people, and I think. In a way, I've been wondering where is the explosion of the millennial generation and Gen Z, because, you know, you're frustrated, you know, you're angry, and I'm sure COVID was a big impact. We saw it in certain protests in Dublin, but I'm sure it's going to happen, like it has to. People can only take so much.
Can I do her husband? Wait.
I just don't really understand this concept of affordable housing. It's a phrase that's thrown around a lot, but if you're saying you've got an average income, you can borrow 3.5 of your income, you've got to have 10% deposit, you're probably about 160 grand. You can't buy a derelict property for that.
No.
So what is affordable? Nothing is affordable. I mean, literally nothing is affordable. If you're gonna, what does that phrase mean? It's meaningless, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, if you think of someone on an average income, you're right, they can only borrow 160, 170,000, so where are they buying a home? And you're right in terms of dereliction. And that again is where I make the argument in the book that we spend 22 billion a year on our health system, on all our health services. And that is right, and we should probably be spending more. But we only spend 4 billion on housing. And you're going, so how, that's indicative of the value we place on it. So I think the state should be putting the money in to go around and be buying tens of thousands of these houses and then selling them affordably with a significant subsidy in them. Because there is this idea somehow that, affordable housing has to kind of be value for money and has to, the state can only put so much into it. And I'm like, why? We don't say to, a cancer, someone who's suffering from cancer, you need to put 50% towards the cost of the treatment, or we're not going to give you the treatment. We don't say that in terms of health services. If you don't, pay up now, half of the cost of the treatment, sure, it's ridiculous. People couldn't afford it. And with housing, it's the same. It's really expensive to provide housing, and we need to see the state needs to cover a lot of that for a significant. It's not for everybody. The reality is that. When we look at it, the statistics are showing that probably about 40% of new households will not be able to afford their home, to buy it. And so that's for 40% of new households. They need significant state support to be able to buy their home.
Catherine, you want to
Thank you very much. Congratulations on your book. I look forward to buying it and reading it. Just this lady here has touched on affordable housing, and I think it's a very important question, and I just come around in a circle to it. I want to pick you up on something. We didn't build a single house in Galway since 2009. We learned nothing from the crash. Not a single public house was built from 2009. We had a quarterly report, what was intended, and that was accountability, and the last category was construction suspended every year from 2009 on. On top of that, a Fine Gael Labour government brought in HAP. housing assistance payment, and that said, go find a house in the private sector, we will pay the landlord, you pay the top-up payment to the landlord to keep the prices artificially high, and you're now taken off the housing waiting list and you're housed. So you talk about policy, and you're absolutely right. Policy has led to this, but it's not bad policy. Those people in power, every single government believes it's good policy. That's the difficulty. And I take issue with this woman down here that talk about politicians with no vision. That plays into a self-serving narrative. There are good politicians with vision in the dawn, and every week they have to combat the narrative that public bad, private good. Anything private is good. And then we go to the specifics. Housing assistance payment. You have the up-to-date on that? I believe it's billions at this point that we're putting in to the
Close to
housing
$1 billion a
assistance.
year.
Yeah.
Billion a year between that RAS and the other private scheme. Separately then worth mentioning is the money that's gone into your first home, buy your first home. I believe it's approaching $1 billion. It was introduced in 17. I believe that over 25% didn't need any help with their deposit. They had it. I believe we're helping consultants. There are consultants in my family. I'm delighted if they can avail of the scheme. I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming the government for bringing in a scheme that's helping people purchase a house that don't need help and keeping the prices artificially high. Finally, in relation to infrastructure, we lack infrastructure even in the city. Our sewage facility is not up to keeping to build the houses that we need. In relation to the land banks that we have, it's a mystery. The council tell us they don't have enough land banks. The land agency was set up as an agency that you want, but it's not functioning as that agency. It functioned on a non-statutory basis. Its first job was to do an audit of all the land in the country, publicly owned. They failed to tell us that, and the years have gone by, and we rewarded them by putting them on a statutory basis, and so on. There are solutions. We get an audit of public land, we build public housing on public land. We stop this nonsense about affordable housing, because if you build public housing on public land, you bring down the prices and you give a message to the market that homes are not commodities. They're not assets to be traded on the national or international markets, and down comes the prices. And finally, every one of us should examine our conscience about snobbery and social housing. As someone who came from number 28 Fursey Road, and then my sister died in number 28, gone back to the point you're making, in a ward in the hospital, and then I end up in the Dáil, 28 was the number of my seat. Home and numbers have a particular significance for us. The houses in Shantala have not changed. They're still the exact same houses, but they're now $500,000 to $750,000 to buy. What has changed is the perception. So we need all of us to look at our attitude to housing. And finally, we need outrage. Not anarchism. We need outrage through very boring meetings, because they're often difficult to keep going, as we all know as TDs and councillors. It takes persistence to keep going and find that narrative. So if your book is helping us to keep going, I welcome that, and I thank you for all your work today. And indeed, the
Thank you. Niall Murphy, Green Party and City Councillor, and I will have a job following that, but the only place I'll be briefer. So I'll make one sort of minor point and ask a question then. So I suppose as a councillor knocking a lot of doors, and you mentioned hidden homelessness, and I'm flabbergasted at the number of people whose doors are knocked on, point out to me there's somebody living in the house who's not, an immediate part of the household, it's a sister or brother or relation, who now has nowhere else and they're on the sofa or whatever. And that, I don't know if we have a way of measuring that, because it's a statistical way of doing it. But my question is more around, in Ireland in general, in terms of property ownership and the rights of landlords and so on, and even minor ancillary things like rights of way. If you go to court, everything is biased very much towards the landowner. And is it your view, or is that something that would change with the referendum on housing, that the power that's invested in the people who own the land, which seems to be very absolute in Ireland, very different to what you pointed out in Barcelona. You were saying in Barcelona, if you're not using the house, they'll take it away from you. That kind of a law. In Ireland, it's hard to imagine that happening here, because land ownership is considered, and maybe it's for historical reasons, and maybe the good reasons, but land ownership is considered as a real absolute right. And is that going to be weakened by a referendum, or is there some other way that can be weakened? Because I think that's key to having a society where we can have rules that help bridge the gap between those who do not have property today and those who do have property.
It's the first time I've seen figures on it. I was looking at the statistics, and I went through the poll, and I was looking at the numbers, and I was utterly shocked to see it was 10% of 18 to 24-year-olds, 10% had been in a situation where they were in a place that wasn't their own address, but they were living temporarily, basically in hidden homelessness, that situation, because they had nowhere to stay in the last year. I put the figures on that. It's probably around 45,000 young people had been in a situation of hidden homelessness in the last year. And that's just the 18 to 24-year-old. When you go up again, there's more. I think it was the figure, you put 250,000 or it was something, it was 250 of people who had known someone or had come across it. But I'm not surprised, because we know that, you know, there is literally so much, you know, as I describe it, so many people unable to buy or rent, but that scale is just phenomenal. Like, that is just really, but that was the first time Simon Community put the figures on it.
And I think, and I even haven't seen that, it does, and again, I think my colleagues from the front line who are in the room will kind of bear this out, like the extent, because we would put an emphasis on homelessness prevention, and we've been working with a lot of people that the goal is to stay out of emergency. But what that means is the overcrowding that's happening. That's, this research was looking at the younger cohort, but like the amount of kind of young families who are staying with others and staying with relatives, the amount of doubling up. And again, you know, we've worked with households where there's 11 or 12 people living in a 3-bedroom house, because it is all kind of the second family's been doubled up. And again, if that was quantified, but the way that the homelessness statistics are counted in Ireland is completely, you know, it's mad accounting in comparison to how it would be done in Europe, in other countries. Domestic violence isn't there. That hidden homeless, you have to be registered as homeless to be counted as homeless, but it's a process to be registered as homeless, and loads of people will do anything but, you know, go for that classification. So the extent to which it's hidden is huge.
No, it is, absolutely. And you're only counted as homeless in the monthly figures if you're in emergency accommodation. So that's the big
You can be rough
problem.
sleeping.
Yeah,
you can be
in this hidden homelessness situation. Yeah. The question of land and well, there currently is within our constitution the right to private property, and that is, but that actually can be limited by, within the constitution it says limited by the common good and social justice, and that's what enabled the Part 5 development to be brought in, where 10% or 20% of private developments would have to be social housing. So there is an ability to limit private property currently, but it is not strong enough. So in the situations of, for example, some land, buying land, that's what the famous Kenny report of the 1970s recommended, buying land around in urban areas at existing use value plus 20% rather than at market value, that it probably wouldn't allow that, but there's legal argument around that. But I think the right to housing would enable the state to basically, you know, compulsory purchase land on a clearer basis, I think, particularly in urban areas where there is, you know, derelict land that's not been used or development land. So it would strengthen that.
There's one last question.
Yeah, just wanted Pat Hardiman here, just from Chantal as well, and one of the reasons the houses were, the council houses were stood the time is because of the engineering, and I just want you to talk about, not only did we have housing we built, but I was talking to a man that was working in the council in the Celtic Tiger area as happened. I just want to comment on what happened in Donegal over the Micah, and you know, what has happened there, and certainly that you know, that the private developers just put up with no standards or no, you know, compared to the council houses that were built in Chantal and Merview and Bournemore, you know. So, you know, like that's an issue at the moment. Who's going? Taxpayers want to pay for that now.
Yeah, absolutely. That whole question of quality of construction, you know, standards, and that is a big issue when we rely on the private market to the private developers who we know, you know, cut corners wherever they can to maximise the amount they're making out of it. It's a business for them. So then we see problems like this literally in the Micah situation. No one shouted stop. No developer was willing to go, oh, you know, this is actually hugely problematic, even though they knew it was going on. because it was, it was business, and this is the problem, and this is where I think a state construction company would raise the standards. And you're right, the council housing, and I've talked to people who were engineers involved in developing them around the country, and they were really proud of building the housing, and they were, and this idea, and it's amazing, the biggest reaction I get on social media is about the state construction company. You can see a private construction interest going nuts at the idea that there would be a public construction company actually challenging because they have a monopoly on it, and providing construction workers with decent contracts, permanent jobs, pensions, these things that we're saying we don't have the capacity to build, to retrofit. We don't have it because construction workers don't get decent, and you can be self-employed and, if you're a certain trade, but it's still precarious. Ultimately, you're up and down in terms of, your possibilities around, if the market turns, which it looks like it's doing again, you're out. We lost 70,000 construction workers emigrated after the last crash. It'll happen again. So I think to provide, workers and quality, that's why, we need that state construction company, I think.
And I would agree. I think we've gone well over time. I really would say to people, do read this book. I think it will really help to manifest the outrage. I know for a living I'm kind of outraged by some of this, but it's I think this is a great opportunity to kind of build a momentum and a clarity in a national conversation. And for writing this book, I want to again say thank you.
Can I just say, the book is on sale at the counter, and why do we have Rory here? Get him to sign them tonight. Make it personal. Thank you.